I'll preface this a tad. I largely come at this topic from two relevant perspectives, that of an anarchist and that of analytical philosophy. Yes, I am that pretentious. Specifically, I am largely inspired by Kropotkin and Bertrand Russell. From these figures, I gain a distaste of the belief that one can own knowledge and an adherence to strict and thorough definitions, respectively. Although I can recognize the inherent impossibility of a truly perfect definition, that does not mean we should not try. If anyone has seen me debate AI products in relation to art before, you would know that I am particularly stringent about the matter, simply on the basis of analytical rigor. If anyone has seen me debate AI before, you would also recognize that I am very heavily anti-AI, at least insofar as it will always be unethical and damaging when implemented in the current structure of society. I have no doubts that under better organization, AI itself could be much better. As it is, however, there are numerous problems. Now, I don't really intend to get into all of those at the moment. I just want to be clear about where I stand on the matter. A very common argument from the anti-AI crowd is that generative AI is either theft in and of itself, insofar as it steals jobs and payment from artists, or that it relies on theft for its development. Both of these, as many in the pro-AI crowd are quick to point out, are fundamentally flawed perspectives. However, that does not mean it is free of ethical concerns along this topic, which the anti-AI crowd rarely capitalizes on, and the pro-AI crowd is quick to ignore. Such is the nature of debate. I don't hold this against anyone in particular. But in order for us to solve real, genuine issues arising from the progression of technology, we must correctly identify what the problem really is, and an important step in that is identifying what the problem is not. What is theft? In using the term, I invoke it broadly and I invoke it ethically. There is a fly flying around. This is not a matter of law, this is a matter of morality. The law is ultimately independent and ought to be subordinate, not the other way around. Theft is, I would posit, the wrongful removal of another's rightfully owned property. If someone came in, took the book, that would be theft. Wrongful here does not strictly mean unethical, but rather unwanted, unwarranted, and unconsensual. A necessary facet of theft is specifically that the rightful owner does not consent to the transaction, nor want it, nor warrant it. It cannot hinge on being unethical, as there are plenty of willful transactions which remain unethical, such as the United States is fully willing to sell to Israel, for example, but just because both parties are willing does not mean that the transaction is ethical, for example. Similarly, it cannot just be unconsensual, but therefore must also meet the conditions of being unwanted and unwarranted. An exchange of property that is solely unconsensual and unwanted by the given party, but may also be warranted, is that of a court order. It would be unwarranted to buy a brand new luxury vehicle, but it can still be a consensual and wanted transaction. One may not want to buy food, but it can still be warranted because one still has to eat, and consensual. When all three criteria are met, however, there is no situation wherein it cannot be theft. Next, there is removal. This is much simpler. To remove something is to take it away. These are heavy, oh my god. By removing a piece of property, the rightful owner no longer has it. This is the primary crux against the idea of piracy being theft. Piracy is a copy, and the original owner, not necessarily rightful, still has it. To borrow the most popular spoof example, if you really did download a car, the original owner would still have their car. There would just be two cars. In all physical situations, if something is not removed, there is no pretense under which to consider it theft as associated conceptually. Another just refers to another moral agent. Only a moral agent is capable of committing unethical behaviors, such as theft, and only moral agents have ethical obligations attached to them, such as not being stolen from. Skipping to property, as it is much more easily explained, I mean it in no special way or significant way, such as the likes of Proudhon or many libertarian thinkers. Property is very merely a possession. The important modifier for any discussion of what constitutes a possession is our last term, rightful. Naturally, what constitutes rightfulness has not yet been ironed out by philosophy in a way everyone will agree on, but we can define it. To be rightful, it must align with ethics and morality. In this basic conception, it really isn't a matter of what we believe to be ethical and moral, but rather that it complies with whatever is chosen. Thus, some action correctly being identified as theft must both conform to basic definitional requirements, which is very easy to demonstrate, but also must violate a principle of our moral systems, which is far harder to demonstrate on the basis that, for any proper discussion, we must first agree on what that system is. That will obviously never happen completely, not until the singularity well and truly is reached and we are all subsumed to the void, aka a single cosmic consciousness, aka the Logos. Don't quote me on that. But I will present my case anyway. Knowing what we mean when we discuss theft, let's apply that to the arguments at hand. Saying that generative AI steals jobs and income from artists is making the claim that those jobs and that income is the rightful possession of the artists, and that the Gen AI removes those possessions in a way that is unconsensual, unwarranted, and unwanted. We can quickly understand that this is not the case. Artists never owned those jobs in the way of possession, and income never gained is income never owned, and therefore never stolen. It is the same argument that media corporations use against piracy, or even just lower than expected revenue, claiming that the income they could have received was already ethically a possession of theirs, and therefore by not receiving it, they were the victim of theft. It doesn't take much to understand how that doesn't really hold up. More interesting is copyright. All the same applies. The claim is that artists have rightful possession over the intellectual property of their artwork, a distinction made because physical media is never in question, only replication and iteration. And that the development, usually training, of Gen AI removes that possession in an unwarranted, unconsensual, and unwanted manner. It is, on first appearances, attractive to dissuade this point trivially, by pointing out that nothing is removed, thereby not being definitionally theft. This is very true, but it really fails to get at the heart of the problem. Although removal is a necessary condition for theft, it is only a condition by necessity, ironically enough. It is a simple enough procedure to stipulate a brand new action altogether, IP theft. It shares all the same features of standard theft, with the significant difference being that, rather than removal, it specifically involves the violation of control over something intellectual rather than physical. Not removal, therefore it is not theft in any way we can define it, but it shares the same bones. The only way to truly do away with the identical ethical concerns to theft is to demonstrate either that ideas and knowledge, i.e. general intellect, cannot be rightfully owned, or that the violation of control over them does not fulfill the criteria of being wrongful. I intend to do the former. Yes, I'm telling you why copyright and patents are complete bunk. Oh, you thought this was about AI? Nope. All just a Trojan horse to finally talk about general intellect. Can you own an idea? Can you own knowledge? The general liberal capitalist answer is that yes, you undeniably can. It is the necessary basis of all copyright and patent laws, of course. If you have some piece of intellect, some product of your mind, completely intangible yet unique in some manner, it is the rightful possession of yours. But why? Seriously, on what grounds is this justified? This is an important exercise. A single set of axioms must create every emergent ethical property. One can certainly simply just state that owning an idea is an axiomatic right, but that's not particularly convincing. It is precisely no more convincing than me stating that it is on its own axiom not valid. I would just be making the statement without justifying it and merely errantly defining it as true. Thus, the same ethical principles and considerations which justify property rights must ideally also justify the right to own general intellect. There's a few ways this can be gone about, arguing over this. The most accurate way would be to justify a certain set of ethics, and then utilizing those principles determine whether or not a right to general intellect emerges. At the same time, proposed alternative systems could also be deconstructed and de-justified. However, I don't wish to make this a general argument trying to convince you of my own moral beliefs generally, nor do I know what yours are. Yes, you right there in the audience. So I cannot deconstruct it. What can be done, however, is to demonstrate how property rights and right to general intellect necessarily differ regardless of overall system, and thus how difficult and therefore implausible any system supporting both is, and the general consequences and issues with supporting the right to general intellect, thus serving to make any system doing so more implausible than another which does not. On the first matter, well, so I did a bit of misleading earlier. Actually, this is the second time. I misled you at first by talking about how important the aspect of removal is to the concept of theft, only to tell you that it is rather unimportant for the meat of ethics and really is only structural. However, I will again tell you here of its importance. Really, the fact of removal is the primary ethical concern. A defensive copyright likes to shift the discussion to assume the ethical concerns are the same. People who believe in copyright believe they are the same, but they are not. In a world where we could copy a physical object and create another for a new person to extend control over, it would not only be acceptable to do so, it would be exactly the right thing to do. It would actually be wholly unethical under almost every system ever to take a feast and refuse to simply double it so that another could eat, or to refuse to double shelter so that others may live and rest, or to double anything which improves people's lives. In such a world, the right to property would not exist as most people conceptualize it today, because there would be no scarcity. The very existence of scarcity is a prerequisite for the right to property. In our world, that which is physically given to another is no longer yours. This is the fact that leads to some basic understanding of property. Obviously, people disagree on the extent. The libertarians extend it to everything you can legally lay claim to, and the communists extend it only as far as your personal and individual use, and fascists extend it only as far as what belongs to the state and what does not. But without this central feature of reality, we would not have this right. That is the most important fundamental difference between physical property and general intellect. As much as the lyricist in me wants to create contrast by saying intellectual quote-unquote property, I refuse to implicitly concede ground to that idea. General intellect is not scarce. Ideas and information and knowledge can be endlessly replicated, recreated, copied, transferred, iterated, and spread without any mark on the original, without any possible absence for which the original transmitter can thereafter suffer. I do well believe that anyone would be incredibly hard-pressed to provide a set of axioms which provides justification for both the possession of that which is scarce and the possession of that which is not scarce. I'm sure it can be done, but not without significant sacrifice in one domain or another, and inexorably, plausibility is reduced. As for the second part of the argument, determining how the issue is itself problematic and contradictory, I will largely borrow from Kropotkin. I really do recommend reading The Conquest of Bread. I also recently just got mutual aid, and I'm excited to read that too. Kropotkin argues that there cannot be any individual right to the general intellect because it is, by necessity, something which has been contributed to by every member of humanity, and is part of the heritage of all mankind. No single individual has produced new technology or new inspiration or truly new information without standing on the shoulders of billions of giants who came before them. Generally, I would argue that such a feat is not impossible, but that it is almost guaranteed to never happen, and especially cannot happen in a way which would in turn provide justification for literally every other case where ideas touched by other men can be owned by a single one. All of our technology that we have today exists only because of the technology that came before. And all of the art we have and cultural stories and ideas and the overall narrative of life we possess has been shaped by everyone we have ever known and everyone we have never known. How can any man claim to own or have possession of the knowledge of a steam engine if they created nothing without the collective collaboration of 1,000 generations prior to them? How can anyone claim possession to the entire conceptual contents of a book when everything they say has been said before, just in different arrangements? None of this is to say that individual genius does not exist, that individual creativity and inspiration cannot exist. And it is especially not to say at all that these cannot be appreciated, celebrated, loved, or rejoiced. It is rather that you cannot keep anyone else from having the same. You cannot own knowledge. The ethical consequences of attempting to own knowledge is inevitably the stifling of innovation and progress, the shutting out of new ideas that could have been, the willful and deliberate silencing of the general intellect in order to extend control over something which we all inherited that you wanted to keep for yourself. Any ethical system which wants to believe in the right to general intellect must contend with this. This is not an ignorable issue, and it is because of this issue and the difference outlined above that I do not believe copyright is at all ethically defensible, not even considering it just can't be an emergent force in the first place under my own system. Any system defending it is either contradictory or completely implausible. It is for that reason, then, that artists have no rightful control over their art. They do not get to decide who takes inspiration from it, or who derives something else from it, or who studies it and learns about it. That knowledge belongs to everyone, and should be replicated as much as possible because it is not scarce, and that fact should be a celebratory one. So no, generative AI is not theft in either way to conceive of that. But it is exploitative. But of course, we have to define terms. Have to. To exploit is to take advantage. This is a broad term, though, and inadequate for our specific purposes. So when I invoke the term exploitation, I invoke it in an ethical sense, in which case, to exploit is to take unfair advantage of another. Framing it in terms of ethics is necessary, as not all exploitation is inherently in the moral realm. As the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy points out, which is a great resource that you should undoubtedly check out, link in the description below, exploiting a weak strategy in chess can't really be considered unethical. But exploitation as we commonly understand it usually carries with it unethical connotations, such as a corporation exploiting a worker or an abusive partner exploiting their significant other. Advantage would be the other's vulnerability, something which is used to the exploiter's own benefit. But the important term is unfair. This is our ethical condition. To be unfair here is in some way to be unethical. More specifically, it is not necessarily that all that is unethical is also unfair, but that all that is unfair is unethical. For something to be fair, it must be just, and thus unfair is then unjust. Yet you cannot have a notion of what is just or unjust without first a notion of what is ethical or unethical. This makes definitively claiming something to be exploitation strikingly difficult, as before so again, we all operate on different moral bases. Yet the point can still be argued, and plausibility weakened or strengthened. I'll also say that most of us very likely share common moral features. It is unethical to kill someone's family to make them do as you want. I'm sure we can agree on. It is unethical for a corporation to demand its workers work for 80 hours a week, depriving them of rest and recreation and other life responsibilities. And this remains unethical no matter how legal or illegal it is. Unless you outsource your morality to the law, I don't really recommend doing that. The other aspect of being unfair is that it is something which not all participants have access to. This is why unfair is specifically chosen. It is not sufficient that there is a vulnerability, but that the existence of this vulnerability becomes an imbalance of power, or that imbalance already existed and is now being exercised. It is not unfair to be better at someone in a video game, but it is unfair to achieve your victory because you have better hardware in your PC, or a better internet connection. The concept of fairness relies on a level playing field, at least for starting conditions of the actions in question. Regardless of how we precisely determine what is unfair, once that determination is made, and we understand that the relationship of the unethic is specifically in relation to a vulnerability that another has that is co-opted, we can call it exploitation. So now I have the onus of demonstrating that generative AI is in some way exploitation, even if it is not theft. I'll start small with a few examples. A single individual creates some piece of artwork. This artwork is then taken by someone else, not the physical medium if it is to be in one, but the likeness of it, and is redistributed endlessly without any accreditation to the original artist. This is a theft, to be fair. It is not a theft of likeness, as we like to colloquially point out, but it is a theft of credit. Even so, it is also exploitation. It is using the vulnerability, which is the availability of the image in question, and using it for one's own benefit, and is unethical. The unethic in question is the lack of accreditation to the original artist. The uneven playing field is the massive imbalance in time and effort between merely sharing a piece of media and actually creating said media, and often the ease with which this exploitation is committed and the relative massive difficulty in getting it to end. Although Kropotkin believes heavily in the freedom of knowledge, this does not mean that the fruits of our general intellect ought to be uncredited. Indeed, a truer and more genuine understanding of the intellect, as some in his tradition have argued, must result in an even greater respect for the individual, especially of the creatively aligned processes. An artist may not deserve, on the basis of their artwork, economic fruits by which copyright and patents provide, but they do undoubtedly deserve the social fruits of their achievement. We can move to a slightly different, but more important example. An artist has created a piece of art. The likeness of this art is then taken by some other entity, be it corporation, individual, or other. They resell it as designs in whatever their own products are. This would not be monetary theft still, but it would certainly be monetary exploitation. Under a capitalistic system, one must produce in order to gain wealth, and through that wealth, survive. An artist selling their artwork is precisely what this is. Although ethically there is no barrier to copying an art piece, there is an ethical problem with depriving someone of their means to survival. No matter what we may say about whether the institution which implemented these means is moral, we can still understand that removing one's ability to survive within it is still unethical. And this overall is a case of exploitation. The uneven playing field, of course, is the massive amounts of greater social and economic power a corporation has over an individual if it be a corporation, and of course, all the same unfairness in the previous example. For my last example, before the big kahuna, let's get a little controversial. Some company offers to pay an independent freelance artist a very small sum, on the order of $10 or whatever, for a proportionally small piece of art. Importantly, under their contract, there is no pretense under which the company has intellectual ownership of the work. Indeed, they are made aware that the artist still has ownership of the piece and exclusive rights to profit, so that they are able to make a living as they intend. The art is only to be used by the company in-house. Then, in-house, the company uses the artwork to produce some other product. Say it was a portrait of some character, and the company designs a digital model of the figure based on it, or any other such scenario. They then sell this digital model for millions of dollars of profit. Is this exploitation? I would argue in the affirmative. We can break it down. There is still an imbalance of power between company and individual, and the individual simply has not the means to sell a product at this scale like the company does. We can also verify a vulnerability the company is taking advantage of, which is the artist's need to sell artwork to survive. Then there is the actual unethic. In this case, it is deriving massive amounts of monetary gain from someone else's labor in ways not compensated. Yes, the company paid them a measly sum at first, but they also said that they would not profit from it. Their meager transformation does not mean they did not profit from this labor directly. The artist was not paid, not given royalties, or anything of the sort. They were not stolen from. Again, outside of accreditation, honestly, one can just as easily stipulate that the company at least gave them credit, and it wouldn't change any of the facts of this case. But they were exploited. Now let's at last get to generative AI. Specifically, the variety trained with massive amounts of data and by these massive corporations or institutions and sold. The specific process these programs use to train can get technical to a degree I'm not competent in, and there is variation, especially for different purposes, but the semantic base stays true. A collection of input is rendered as raw data which a computer can read, and then the model iterates over this data, and with an input on what is right for it to generate and what is wrong, learns, or rather creates an algorithm by which to determine the next part of the sequence, what to actually generate. For non-specialized models, such as anything capable of making more than a picture of a single subject, this requires a massive amount of data to be fed to it so that it can more properly understand what is important and what is not, what is right and what is wrong in its output. Now, it does not think like humans do, nor does it learn like humans do. But it does learn insofar as it can go from random static noise to a photorealistic copy of a subject matter with ever-increasing specificity, which is honestly an incredibly remarkable result of human genius. Now I wonder, who owns AI? So, how is this process exploitation? It is the commodification of the collective intellectual labor of mankind. It is, ironically, the same sort of exploitation that copyright and patents were identified to be, and still are. It is taking this labor of genius and using it to create another product. While it is not a problem necessarily that copyright is being violated by its training, it is, firstly, targeting a vulnerability, which is, again, both the need to be shared for economic security by artists and the need of social joy and hobbies from internet users. This is important, actually. It is common for some to suggest that if you do not want your intellectual labor commodified by another, then you should not let your intellectual labor out into the world. This denies the economic concerns many artists face in needing to get their work known, no matter the medium. This denies the intrinsic social aspect of mankind and how the internet has provided no greater ease of socialization, and one cannot be reasonably expected to forego all online contact for no greater reason. This denies our drive for purpose, leisure, recreation, and enjoyment we all find in hobbies, whether it be of an artistic variety or otherwise. And another factor of social joy and leisure and meaning in being able to communicate with another person who just gets it. These are the vulnerabilities that this variety of generative AI targets to train its models. To say that this is an uneven playing field is the simplest to demonstrate. None of us own a massive data center, unless you're some multimillionaire CEO or venture capitalist who just so happens to have stumbled across this. If you would like to buy me a data center too, that would be much appreciated. None of us have the social or literal capital enough to produce a model of such extensive capabilities or to monetize it. Yes, it is actually surprisingly easy to train your own model on even just an average computer. Yet, it can be nowhere near as powerful or broad due to simply hardware limitations. What's more, none of us have the capabilities to gather the data needed. We can certainly scrape some individually, often using vital archival websites, or even putting in large quantities of data we individually produced. But the sheer quantity that these models gathered, either on their own or for these purposes, is inaccessible to any layman. And thus an individual's training data is more than likely the exact same training data gathered by one corporation or another. Moreover, good luck getting the backing of a government or enough venture capitalists to succeed in anything large-scale or monetizable. This is largely a product that only the wealthy can sell. Lastly, this uneven targeting is unethical. It is unethical precisely because of the fact of commodification. Debates can be had about whether or not a completely free model is still exploitative. Due to me not wanting to cover literally every possible iteration of an AI model, which is sort of ironic if you think about it, I have decided to limit my argument specifically to what is being sold. Though, as some food for thought, we can also consider the omnipresent issue of a complete and total lack of accreditation to the artists who made even the free model possible. And I can say for sure that this sale is what makes it wrong. You cannot sell the intellectual labor of another person or multiple people ethically. It doesn't matter, as some have tried to say, that the general intellect is being transformed into data readable by computer. Just as it does not matter whether the physical media is being resold by another unauthorized person, or if it is just the likeness, as in the first example. You cannot ethically own the general intellect, nor can you sell it as a service. In this manner, we can say that generative AI under these circumstances is unfairly taking advantage of another. Much more to the point, it is exploitative. But from the beginning, there have been two ways to interpret the idea that it is theft. The second being in the consequences of lost jobs and income. Can this better be understood as exploitation also? At the scale of corporations, yes. Isn't it a little funny how every video about some sort of ethical concern about technology can really be boiled down to corporations suck? The use of Gen AI by corporations has begun to result and will absolutely continue to result in the wide-scale layoffs of working artists across a wide amount of fields. Sculptors are probably safe. only for now though. Most hit will obviously be digital artists, writers, and musicians. In a system where digital artists, and even in the physical arts like painters, are already routinely exploited, receiving little to no pay for oftentimes extensive and intensive labor, both physically and intellectually. Where writers experience the same all too low pay, short notice, intense work hours, and freelance obligations that take up way too much time being on call, while still needing to find pay for months to years on end otherwise. Where aspiring musicians are pressured into predatory contracts which take away their creative liberty and the economic rights to their creative work, and often financially trapped by producers and labels. Where almost no one can ever have any legal recourse due to the absurd amount of legal, social, and economic power these predatory institutions have, that even the world's most famous artists and creators have to fight tooth and nail, sometimes for decades, just to make it out, much less make it out for the better. Where this system is in place, Gen AI will make it much, much worse. Wages, already usually far too low to survive on, will plummet further still. This will happen completely whether or not an employer will use AI. It's a threat. It's already being used as a threat. That threat is enough to make workers do more for less pay. They already work themselves to the bones in these industries. What's left to work down to? As wages go down, so too will the working hours go up. They will go up because that is what an artist will have to do for the job. Less resources will be available for any artist who does not use AI. And like so many people are quick to point out, yes, there will, in all likelihood, always be a market for genuine, human-exclusive art. This market will be rife with exploitation to a degree more extreme than we have even now. The increased competition with AI products or AI-aided products will force the large majority of working artists to incorporate it in some way in their process, decreasing artistic creativity and control. All of this is exploitation. Many are right. AI is a tool. A tool used by large economic titans to further cut down on their costs at the expense of everyone else. Again, it doesn't matter if they'd ever actually be willing to make their products with AI. Certainly, some will, maybe some won't. The fact that it is an option is enough to give them even more leverage, take advantage of even more vulnerable people, and shift the entire terrain in their favor. Sure, nothing is being stolen from the artists, but that doesn't mean everything's alright. AI is already making these issues worse. And some may reasonably point out that this is just the market. That's how it works. So that I say, you're correct. The system is working exactly as intended. The thesis I am arguing for has never been that AI is inherently bad. My point is that AI cannot be good under current conditions. This is not unique to AI. That doesn't make it any less deserving of critique. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't address the problems as they are arising, before they become too ingrained for us to fight with just our voices. You do want to keep your voice, don't you? You know, honestly, I've been quite interested in debating AI these past few weeks. I'll very likely be making some more videos on it in the near future, covering a few more aspects of it all. Of course, on the agenda is whether or not AI products can be considered art. Hurrah! But if there's anything else you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. And if you disagree with anything I've said, definitely let me know about that too. I'd love to hear responses to these points. Debating AI has honestly largely been a source of quick and convenient engaging debate and rhetoric practice. But as seen here, I do think it has some really important parts to it that shouldn't be overlooked. Now, while you're writing to me in the comments though, don't forget to take a quick break to grab some water and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. I do get a hit of dopamine every time those numbers go up, and while you're in around the description, don't forget that every source I use throughout this video, although it's not a lot this time, is listed below, and you can also find my other channel, H28 Book Reviews. Everything here has been authentically H28 Politics. Never stop learning. Or machine learning, if you're the AI scraping my script to make your channel.